student in the room, because if you're the dumbest guy in the room, you're always going to be the one who can learn the most. And every day I walk into that office, and I am definitely the dumbest guy in the room. So thank you guys for inviting the dumbest guy at PlatinumGames to give you a talk about PlatinumGames. But hopefully we can learn some things, and I can learn some things from you guys, because I think the program you guys have here is really cool, and it should be a lot of fun. So first up, I kind of want to give you guys a glimpse of Platinum. This is our show reel. We actually show these to publishers before we pitch. So since I know you're pitching today, and we're going to talk a little bit about pitching, this is our show reel. This is what we've done at Platinum. Oh, are you not getting sound? All right. You guys have played Bayonetta. There's lots of gunfire. Wonderful 101, Metal Gear Rising Revengeance, a little bit more Bayonetta 2. Sorry we didn't get the sound work out on this. Unless you guys want me to play it again, want to play it again?
Yeah, we'll get the sound worked out.
All right.
I'll be right back.
No, it's on my laptop. It's my fault.
It happens in most pitches.
Cool. Yeah, I've had this happen in pitches before too, so hold on 1 second. Yeah, I know exactly where it was. It's just me being dumb. Dumbest guy in the room. Here it is. Learn how to use your Mac. All right, if this is loud, forgive me, but let's try this again. You guys ready? How are we going with this, Ollie?
Yeah.
Cool. So, who am I? I was born in 1982, so I'm 32 next month. I'm into programmers. One of the guys was actually on the programming team in high school with me. And I realized that I was not a very, very talented programmer. I think to be a really good game programmer, you need to be just obscenely dedicated. Like, the good game programmers that I've worked with are the kind of people who don't sleep by choice, right? Like crunch isn't an option, it's just a lifestyle for those kind of guys. And I wasn't one of those guys. I also learned very quickly that DAS at UF wasn't ready yet. As a program, they were working really hard, and I think that they've done a good job. But back in 2000, 2001, they were still figuring it out, and I didn't think it was going to get me to where I wanted to be. So, what did I do? I did the classic college thing. I changed my major. And I changed it to, when this thing is nice, Japanese.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense, right? I went from digital arts and sciences to trying to learn how to read this stuff. And it was an intense thing to do and kind of silly. What was I thinking? Well, really simple. I had a plan, and I knew that I wanted to be in Japan making games. Not to knock Western game development, and I really like Western game development. I think that people having creative control over their product is a really good thing, and I knew that I wanted to be a part of that. So one of the things that I think is important, and I think it's smart of all of you to be in a program like this, is you need to have a plan for your career. I think that most people spend more time planning their vacations than they do their careers, and I think that that's a joke. Like, most people kind of just sit around and be like, you know, oh, I'm going to do job hunting, or oh, I want to do this, or I want to do that. If you don't know where you want to be in 3 years, 5 years, and 10 years, then you do not have a plan for your career. And having a plan for your career is what's going to let you set the short, mid, and long-term goals to get where you need to be. And I think that people will spend more time honestly thinking about their vacations and doing that. And that's, you know, silly, right? So my passion was video games, and it was especially helping Japanese games get to the place where I think that they need to be. So I think the creator-driven game design is super important, and having that creative force behind a game is super important. But as Japanese games have progressed recently, I think you've seen things kind of start turning in a wrong direction. And back in 2000, I could see that was coming, and I really wanted to change that. Just a funny anecdote. I interviewed in 2002 with Microsoft. So I'm sure that you guys have seen it. Microsoft recruits everywhere, and they come in, and they really want engineers in test. Man, engineers in test is like the Microsoft job if you're coming out of school. And I took this interview, and I was like, listen, yeah, I'm programming, I know what I'm doing, I'm not super passionate about it. I am really passionate about helping Western games succeed in Japan and Japanese games succeed in the West. And I'd love to know if there's anything in Xbox that would fit that paradigm. They looked at me like I was nuts. Like, this recruiter was like, you're not a software engineer in test? And I was like, I can be, but that's not where I'm most helpful to you. So I knew what I wanted to do then, and I realized at that moment that if I didn't make it happen myself, it wasn't going to happen. So when I switched majors, it was because I was confident that I had the skills and the passion needed to do what I wanted to do in Japan, and it was time for me to make it happen myself. It wasn't about code, it was about games. So how did I end up in Japan? The plan was in place, so it was time to execute. And you know, once you've got a plan, executing on that plan is the most important thing that you can do, right? I mean, if you're coming from a programmer background, right, the implementation is like, what, 25% of what you really should be doing, and the planning is the other 50 to 75. If you're a great programmer, it's 75, and if you're a bad programmer, the other 25% is fixing what you've messed up. So I studied abroad. That was the first step, and that was the best decision I ever made, because if you try to learn a foreign language in a foreign country, you're just going to be foreign. You need to go wherever you need to be to learn the skills. So I think you guys are doing the same thing here towards game design, right? You could be at a school learning programming and get lots of skills and end up with some database programmer working for like some yearbook company, figuring out how to put a whole bunch of pictures into rows, right? Or you could learn the skills to be a game designer. But to be a game designer, you need to be around other passionate game designers. So that's why you guys have probably made the first smart decision in your plan if you have one. The other thing that's incredibly important is that I made the right connections, and I made them in the right ways. So I think you have to put yourself in a position to succeed, because it's not going to happen for you. You have to make it happen yourself. So just a quick anecdote about how I did that. There was this board, and it was very private back probably in 2000, started in 2000 and survived until 2005. It was called Tokyopia. And essentially it was just all these foreign game developers who lived in Tokyo and who were in the industry trying to get together, and they would go out to drinks every week on Thursday. I started posting on that board before I went to Japan. Got to be really good friends with a lot of these guys, and those connections directly led to me getting into the Japanese games industry. So to give you an example, like who's in there? Greg Tavares, who was a programmer in Crash Team Racing and then went to Sega and then was the lead programmer on Loco Roco, was in there. There were lots of really, really smart dudes who had done what I had already done, had done what I really wanted to do, and I knew, be the dumbest guy in the room, learn how to be friends with these guys, learn what they did to get where they are, and do the same thing. So I think you got to make the right connections. Another quick anecdote. In the right ways is super important. Oftentimes, in my experience, especially in Japan. So we do a kind of game dev drink up as well. You get a lot of people who aren't in the games industry but really want to be, and they come up to you and all they want to do is talk about games, which is awesome, but I'm a person. So if I've just worked 10 hours and talked about games the entire time and then go out for a drink with other game developers, we're probably going to talk about games, but we're also probably going to want to talk about other things. So the smartest thing that you can do when you're networking and making connections with these kind of people is just understand that they're people and that they've probably worked on games all day and don't want to talk about, you know, how did we procedurally animate the hair on Bayonetta? You know, it's really interesting discussion when I'm in the office, but not over a beer. So make connections in the right way, and those people will come through for you in the end, I promise. So I knew I had to be in Japan to get to work in Japan, and I did what it took to get into that position, which meant that I taught English for a year. I signed up for the JET program, and I realized that if I was trying to bang on the doors of Japanese publishers, I wasn't going to get answered if they had to go to extra effort to hire me, right? So if they're going to have to sponsor my visa and do all these extra things, I wasn't going to get into that position as a new hire. If I was a top dog programmer or some hotshot game designer who had like 5 or 6 shipped games and 8 or 9 years of experience, and yeah, they're going to do that, we'll sponsor your visa, but hey guys, I really want to make games with you. Oh, we have to spend thousands of dollars to hire you and you've never done anything? Not going to happen. So I taught English for a year. I don't think it was slumming it. I had a teacher at UF who told me that I would never escape the English-speaking ghetto. Those were his exact words. So yeah, I did what it took. I think you guys should do what it takes because nobody's going to give it to you. And I can't stress that enough. So now that I was in the Japanese industry, I know that a lot of people are kind of interested in the Japanese industry. This is by no means an exhaustive list, and this is entirely my personal conjecture, but how is it different? Structural. So pipelines favor broad generalists in Japan, not specialists, and game design means something very different. A lot of game designers in the West are actually level designers with scripting experience, which is really, really, really cool. They are not what they call game designers in Japan. Game designers in Japan are glorified Excel jockeys, but they're really, really smart. So if you can use Excel as a word processor, you could be a game designer in Japan because game design in Japan is all about planning. And these are the guys who are writing the plans. And these plans are sometimes very vague and sometimes very detailed. And depending on the company, they could be very westernized and be the level designer scripter guys. But in kind of the Capcom production studio for Clover Platinum method that I got brought up in, game designers are primarily paper-based, and they're almost like sub-directors. You have a director that's overlooking everything, that has a really strong view of the creative direction and creative vision of a project, and the game designers are executing that vision, but also kind of describing their own vision and handing it out to everybody and trying to build a consensus. We also don't have like, you'll have environmental artists here, and those environmental artists are basically brushing up white boxes, right? I mean, you'll white box out a level and then you'll make it really pretty with all your environmental artists. In Japan, in our system, environmental artists are actually the level designers, and they're responsible for getting that plan from, the game designer, which is like, I want to have an arena where you're going to fight Fortitudo from Bayonetta, and they're just going to make the level design. That's the direction they're going to take. They're going to build it all the way out, and they're going to take responsibility all the way through final polish. So it's not, they're kind of halfway game designers, halfway level designers, all the way environmental artists, and they're not sleeping either with the programmers because they've got a really hard job. And it kind of leads to more generalization. So that's one of the ways. The next is interpersonal. Our pipelines favor consensus building and iteration, not documentation and implementation. That sounds kind of rough, but what that means is, for instance, in Platinum, we don't have a single partition in the entire company. Our CEO has a glass wall around his office, and that's it. There's no locked doors other than meeting rooms, and everybody's together. We want people in our system to stand up and talk to each other, right? If you need to write an email to explain your game design when you can stand up, turn around, and talk to the guy who's going to implement it, you should probably stand up, turn around, and talk to the guy who's going to implement it and not write a big doc. So how that works is you can't have offices, and you can't have partitions, and you can't have, like you guys have cubicles, which are really cool. They actually remind me a lot of what Naughty Dog is like inside, if you ever get the chance to tour Naughty Dog. But yeah, we can't do that in our system. There's too many generalists and there's too much intercommunication that needs to happen before we can get anything done. So the stand-up is absolutely critical to our way of making games. Crunch can also feel omnipresent, but it's actually a function of the work style and productivity differences. So work-life balance, right? In Japan, you will probably spend an hour and a half of your day reading comics instead of going home. But then you'll go home at like 10:30. And dudes are really cool with that. Like, that is the way that they make games. I try to get out of there as fast as I possibly can. I have a personal rule to never eat dinner at the office unless it is a critical situation. I would rather work until 10:30 and try to scrounge something up at a convenience store than take an hour and a half break for dinner and end up going home on the last train. That's just me. Japanese guys, though, will totally take that hour and a half dinner break, go out, come back to the office, work for 3 or 4 more hours, and then kind of scuttle out at midnight sometimes. But that's kind of a crunchy situation. Normally people get out of there much earlier than that, especially when you're in pre-pro or something that's not right before shipping a game. And sometimes when you're right before shipping, especially in Japan, it's brutal. The Okami Crunch, which I was not a part of and I watched from afar, ended up they were working, I think, like 12 to 5 a.m., burning a disk every morning, handing it off to QA, sleeping while they did the morning check, and then starting to do bug checks right after that. But Okami came together right at the end, and it was really crazy. It was one of the scariest things I've ever seen, but the shipped game was awesome, and I think they were really proud of it. I think that a lot of studios at Crunch are also really proud of what they ship, and that's the only thing that makes it worth it. Finally, commercially, we've got a huge problem in Japan, and they refer to it in Japan as the Galapagos problem. So we've got large market differences, and Japanese publishers have a distinct lack of commitment to high budgets unless you are the A team at a huge publisher. So if you're the Resident Evil team or the Final Fantasy team, you're getting money, and everybody else is not getting money. So that's why you don't see big AAA games coming out of Japan anymore, right? So these publishers don't want to spend the amount of money that US publishers are risking to make AAA, unless you're Final Fantasy or Resident Evil. So the other problem that we have is anything that's on an HD machine is otaku-centric right now. So they're trying to make all of their money back in Japan as opposed to trying to make their money back from selling worldwide. So if you're trying to make an HD game in Japan, you're almost always going to be like, a Dynasty Warriors game or something with Gundam in it, or just something that you know that you can recoup in Japan and not recoup from the West. We're one of the only studios who's trying to sell evenly. And if you look at our sales figures, generally we do a third in Japan, a third in the US, and a third in Europe, which is really, really rare for Japanese game developers. Finally, and I don't want to get into a big spiel about monetization, but if you have in-app purchase or you want to sell things on mobile, Japan is the biggest market in the world. Japanese people will buy $1 or 100 yen things over and over and over and over again until it's just insane. That's why a company like SoftBank spends, like $1.5 billion on Supercell, just so they can figure out a way to get all those Japanese people to spend a whole bunch of money on Clash of Clans because they're already doing it in other territories. So it's kind of cut the legs out of HD development in Japan because everybody's like, we can monetize mobile and everybody will buy it here, and all we need to do is make some card game that's got some pretty anime characters on it, and we're going to be rich. So that's what happened to Japan in a nutshell. So proceeding on, who succeeds in the Japanese game industry? I know some people are probably interested in working in Japan. I think people who are open-minded, driven, independent, passionate people are going to succeed anywhere, but those are definitely the kind of people who succeed in Japan. You have to love Japan and you have to speak Japanese. I very rarely see people who hate Japan succeed in Japan. It happens, but it's really rare. Like, there was a time when this guy spent a whole, I don't know, probably 35 minutes ranting about how he couldn't buy a gallon of milk. He had to buy it by the liter. And people like that are just going to be inherently unhappy with their living situation and not make good games. People who fail. Number one is otaku, right? I know people love anime and really want to, work in the Japanese games industry, and I know so much about Japan and anime. You will never know more than a Japanese person knows about anime because you didn't grow up with it, right? They grew up with it. Everywhere they turned, there were Kamen Rider figures. They are the experts. You will never get a job in a Japanese studio telling a Japanese publisher, developer, whoever, that you are more of an expert in their childhood than they are. It's never going to happen. Be an expert in your childhood, right? So be able to bring something different to them that's stimulating and kind of changes the way that they view and think about things. Self-centered people tend to not work out because of the amount of communication involved. So if you're really focused on your needs and kind of what you want to do, it's not really going to work out for you because the whole pipeline is set up for consensus building, and it's really difficult to push that thing through unless you're the creative director and basically the top dog. People who put work before fun tend to burn out if you're a Westerner because the work is intense. And if you're not worried about fun and trying to take care of yourself and having a good time, you just crash and burn. It's ugly. I've seen it plenty of times. And finally, people who just want to be in Japan, I really want to be in Japan, never works because the work is intense and you're going to end up being that person who really hates Japan because you can't buy a gallon of milk, and it gets ugly. So I want to go through a few things. I've worked on a lot of projects. I helped translate a few of the Phoenix Wright games. I wrote the script for the 3D Bionic Commando that nobody played. I bailed out of that project because that was ugly. But I made really good friends, and my old boss, Ben Judd, at Capcom is actually our agent now. He works for DDM and he represents Platinum. So never burn your bridges, even if you need to get out of a situation that's not right for you. I've worked with a lot of creative directors. I've worked with a lot of producers. I was the idiot then who raised his hand and said he wanted to be a producer. And I've learned a few things. I've only been producing a big game myself for about a year, so I'm constantly still making mistakes and learning, but I'm kind of calibrating and understanding what I think, what I've seen from other people, and what in personal experience works, and I kind of want to share a few of these lessons and things I wish someone would have told me sooner. Oh, sorry guys. That was a tweet saying screensaver. So qualities of producer. Cares more about the end user than anything. Games are $60, right? This is a spiel that I give to everybody when they join Platinum, especially the foreign staff. Games are $60. And when I was young, $60 was a big deal. And I did not like to spend $60 on something that I didn't want. And I wanted to give, that $60 meaning to me. If you're making a game, you need to remember that some kid who probably mowed lawns for 3 weeks is going to spend that only $60 that he has on something that you worked on. So if you look at it and you're like, yeah, it's good enough, no, it's not good enough. Because that kid doesn't want good enough. He wants the best. And when you're making a game, I think you have to have that attitude about it at all times. So a great producer cares more about the end user than anything. Cares about the team more than anything else, right? So the end user and the team are tantamount, right? Allows creators to create by focusing on the product, and hunts for information and learns as much as possible, as fast as possible, right? I've worked with producers who kind of produce in their own bubble, and they can do their bubble exceptionally well. But I've found that the producers that are constantly seeking out new information and trying to understand what's going to happen on the chessboard 3 steps further away are the people who do really great jobs. So the qualities of creative director. I work with this one all the time, and he's got some distinct qualities. That's Hideki Kamiya, if you don't know. He created, he did Resident Evil 2, created Devil May Cry, Beautiful Joe, Okami, Bayonetta. He's an intense guy to work with. So qualities, cares about the end user more than anything. This is actually something I learned from him, but yeah. Cares about the team more than anything else, allows creators to create by focusing on the product, and hunts for information and learns as much as possible as fast as possible. Wow, that seems really similar. I don't think there's a huge difference between a creative director and a producer. I think that they focus on different things, but they should be the same kind of people. So to me, a creative director must have a clear communicated vision for the game they want to create. They must push the team, right? Within the boundaries set by the producer. They can't spend, unless you're Rockstar North, they can't spend $200 million on a game and expect, the studio to be there tomorrow. Especially if you guys have been watching the layoffs that have been happening in the past couple of weeks. That's people dodging risk very, very quickly. And a producer exists to enable the team to execute on the creative director's vision. So as a creative producer at Platinum, my job is to create the environment to let that director run wild. I want to see what he can make. He's got the vision. He knows exactly what he wants to do. I think he should do it. I just need to make sure that he can do it in a way that's not going to crash and burn. So my job is to make sure that he can do that safely, and then I can take what he does and communicate it to the kid that's going to spend $60. Because that kid is the most important part of the chain. And his $60 is the most important thing that keeps everything rolling, right? So it's that simple and that difficult. Why? Because people have bad ideas. Like, you know how you hear it, no, nothing's a bad idea or nobody has to know? People have terrible ideas, right? And terrible ideas happen all the time in brainstorming sessions. Terrible ideas occasionally get into a game. If you've ever played a Japanese game and gone through the UI, that is a terrible idea, universally. If you had to order McDonald's like a Japanese UI, it would be the most annoying thing ever, right? You'd be like, hamburger, how much is it? $2.99. Do you want hamburger? Yes. Do you really want hamburger? Yes. That hamburger will be $2.99. Do you want to use $2.99? Yes. Like, there's so many blocks and friction and just craziness that happens, and that's all based on one single bad idea. We need to be polite to our users, right? So a Japanese UI design is based on the idea that user intent is wrong, and Western UI design is based on the idea that user intent is always right. So that's how you can like totally delete your save with one button in a Western game, and you literally like have to run around your block and try to figure out how long the DualShock 3 can exist on Bluetooth power before you can get through a Japanese menu. It's just two different ways, but I personally think that bad ideas happen everywhere. Another one, budget, right? So time, quality, money, pick two, most likely one, and never be happy with any of them, is generally the producer's credo. Budget gets in the way of everything, but there's no way around it because people need to, feed their families, and people who are giving you money to create something need to make sure that their shareholders get reimbursed, right? There's a return on investment. There's all sorts of crazy budget things that drive you crazy every single day of your life. A quick tip, if you want to be a producer and you can't do your household budget, you won't be able to do a game budget. And if you're not doing a household budget for yourself as a producer, just do it as an exercise and track every single thing that goes in and comes out, and think about, the receipts and just everything that you do. I've got a really complicated spreadsheet for my household budget that simulates like cash flow 6 months out in advance. All of that stuff's really easy for you to do now, just to get yourself in the mindset of doing that, because it's going to drive you insane when there's millions of dollars at stake, and if you screw up, somebody might get fired and not be able to feed their family. So if you can't feed your own family, don't take responsibility for feeding somebody else's. Illness. I know it sounds weird, but as a producer, I deal with so many people getting sick, whether it's somebody taking 4 days off because they've got a cold, or somebody having surgery. All of this happens constantly, and it just wrenches getting thrown into production constantly. You have to dodge them and work around them and understand how they're going to impact people. Happens all the time. Next one, schedule. Schedule is like the ugliest word in the world. Unless you're on Valve time, it's just going to be brutal. we're not necessarily the most famous company for shipping things exactly on time. Thank God now we don't announce release dates until we know when a game's actually going to ship, and you don't get the constant delay. Oh yeah, that Resident Evil game was 2.5 years late because they announced it when it was 4 months in. Doesn't really happen as often, but schedule management is always crazy. Personalities, people don't get along sometimes. And as a publisher, they don't care. So as a producer, you're going to have to spend time managing personalities. Somebody, I forgot who it was, but somebody told me that 70% of a producer's life is spent arguing about how people treat each other. And that's totally true. Like, you would not be, like, somebody comes up, why hasn't game design figured out how to do this yet? We can't do anything without game design figure something out. It's like, guys, they're right there. Why are you telling me that you want them to figure something out? You want me to go over there and say, hey, figure this system out so that animator can do what he needs to do? Happens constantly. And literally, like, it would be you coming to me and saying, you know, figure out the game design. You're right there. Doesn't happen, and you have to deal with it constantly. And I don't think there's a way around it. Publishers. Publishers love to say things. And they're really, really good at saying things. They're also paying for things, so they get to say things. And dealing with publishers is really important because they're the only reason that you can make games in a lot of cases. I mean, if you go indie, great. But eventually you're going to have to deal with them. Some of them are really smart, some of them aren't so smart, some of them will do things without telling you and cause a mess. Some of them will do things that, you know, make you super duper happy. But managing a publisher is almost as important as managing your team. There's lots of really good producers who can manage down and keep their team in line. There's far fewer producers who can manage up and keep a publisher aligned with what your vision is moving forward. Oftentimes that ends up being a studio head. If you've got a really engaged studio head who understands what's happening on the production floor, then you're probably in good shape. If you've got a studio head who's more concerned about the books, then you're going to be in trouble. Inefficiencies. I hunt them down with a passion, but they crop up constantly. Like, somebody always finds going back to bad ideas a bad way to do something good. And you have to find those and kill them as quickly as you possibly can. So the goal should always be the best way of doing something great. Never settle for the bad way of doing something good. And quality. Nobody sets out to make a bad game, ever. There are no people watching the live stream, and everybody in this room I'm preaching to a choir, but if you're watching the live stream, there is no such thing as a lazy game developer. There are lots of things that affect quality. All of these big things on this board that make it feel like a game developer cuts corners. Nobody wants to ship anything bad. And all of these factors are the reason that you play a game and you're like, oh no, that sucked. Nobody wants to ship anything bad. Although if I can find the guy who created that hovercraft sequence in Killzone 2 that just did not work and drove me crazy, we would discuss what factors brought that into play. Finally, sorry dude. Finally, users. I love our fans. Does anybody here follow Kamiya-san on Twitter? We've got a couple. So I help him out with that. He does almost all of that on his own and keeps me scared the entire time, but I watch a feed of everything that people say to him, and I watch the feed of everything that people say to me, and everything that people say to the company. I kind of want to see what the vibe is about what's going on. People say some weird things. I've gotten death threats. Man, when we announced Metal Gear, seriously, like, we kicked somebody's grandma. Like, I don't know what we did to make so many people so mad. I was at a party once, and a Raiden cosplayer walked up to me, and she was like, I've heard about the story, and I know what's going on, and I know what you guys are doing to Raiden, and we're going to kill you. And I'm like, oh, wow. She's actually a really nice person, but, like, people get really passionate and amped up about video games. And personally speaking, I think we need to expect a little bit more maturity out of our fan base, and I'm somewhat prone to get angry when people do stupid things on Twitter towards me. But users have expectations, and they want to spend that $60 in the best possible way. And I think that a lot of the kind of user friction that you see in the industry, you know, like people like Adam Orth getting fired because he thought always online was a good idea, or, you know, that I think that dude got railroaded. But users really want to spend their money in a smart way, and they want what they want. And you have to respect that, even if it goes against what you're trying to do. And if you understand what they're saying to you and you can respond and interact with them and explain why you're doing something as best you can, then you're going to be in a good place. But understand that as much as you love them and as much as you're making a game for them, sometimes they won't get it, and the smartest thing that you can do is just communicate to them why. So, where does this leave us? Really simple place. Game development is hard. Who said that? Me right now. It is not easy, right? Like, you wake up, I have a terrible habit of checking my email when I wake up, and I am amped up from the minute I look at that email in the morning until the minute I go to sleep, worried about what email is going to be showing up in my inbox in the morning. So it's an all-consuming job. We do it because we love it, but you have to love it because it's really hard. The only thing that makes it palatable is trust, right? So I cannot express to you how important trust is to a producer. You have to trust people. Trust your creative director and team. No, seriously, you really have to trust them, right? You can play a game and be like, man, I don't think this is going to work. And then 3 weeks later, as a producer, you're going to see it work. And you're going to be like, why did I yell and scream and pitch an entire fit when they were on the right course? Seriously, you have to trust them. If you can't trust them, you need to get rid of them. You cannot work with a team that you can't trust. And if the team is more powerful than you, the person they're going to get rid of is you. But you need to get rid of people that you can't trust, because it's the only thing that makes the wheels turn. The problem with getting rid of people that you can't trust is that there's no guarantee that the next person's going to be better. So the important thing that you have to do as a producer is build trust where there is none. If you're, as a producer, not getting along with somebody that's on your team, or they're not getting along with somebody and they're not performing to your standards, you need to figure out why and try to put them in a scenario where they can get a win, right? If somebody's not happy with their job because they can't create what they want to create or do what they want to do, it's your job to create that environment for them to be as creative as possible. So get them a win, right? There's an animator who wants to create a really cool attack motion, but the game designer doesn't want to let him do it. Go to the creative director and see if you can't skunkworks it behind that dude's back and put it in the game. And if it works, that dude's going to get a win because the other people are going to look at it and be like, that's awesome. So try to get trust built that way. The next thing I want to bring up is flexibility is the best methodology, right? So there's Agile, there's Scrum, waterfall, Gantt charts, capacity charts. You could use MS Project if you're insane. Hansoft if you're not insane. Excel calendars, task list, right? All of these things are just ways to control the madness. There's none of them are right? I mean, Agile development's awesome. Yeah, I kind of think Agile works for games pretty well, but that doesn't mean that some dude's not going to come up with a better idea next week and everybody's going to be like, oh, remember when we all did Agile? Because that's what everybody was doing, said when everybody was doing Gantt charts for everything, right? So the methodology can never trump trusting and supporting your team's best practices. Build your own methodology, right? If you're going to be like, no, you must obey this sprint, but your team has a great idea that doesn't fit in that sprint, and you need to figure out a way to, maybe build out the feature set so you can polish what you need to polish for the end of the sprint and push some stuff off that way, or extend the sprint. Be flexible, because if you trust your team, they're going to get you to the place that you need to be. So what do you do when things don't make sense? You touch an iPad. I don't know. The value of I don't know is something that people don't recognize and I think is really important. Sometimes I don't know is the most valuable answer in the world, but is also the hardest one to give. I am sure when you guys are in class and you're talking to the faculty about something that they explained to you that you didn't quite understand, I don't know is the last answer you want to tell somebody, and it's the first answer that you should be giving. If you're making something and, how is this mechanic going to work 4 stages from now? And you don't know yet, say you don't know. Don't BS the answer on the spot. It never works. I don't know exposes a whole bunch of really important things, right? So encourage an environment where I don't know is a common answer. I don't know is information, and it's valuable information, right? It creates a roadmap for future work. If you don't know how this mechanic's going to work in that 4th stage, then you know that you have work to do to make sure that that mechanic works in that 4th stage. And you can start road mapping that out and planning. And that all happens because somebody has the courage to say, I don't know, right? It also exposes areas of risk and concern. If you don't know how that mechanic's going to work in stage 4, I don't know means that you have a problem, but it's a solvable problem. And it also allows people to fail quickly, and failing quickly is incredibly important. So I've got a personal theory, and that's the difference between a failure and an F-up. So to me, failures are planned, they're recoverable, and they happen due to risk, right? So if you know your risks and it just doesn't work out, you can recover from that. That's a failure. F-ups are not planned. They might be salvageable, sometimes they're not. They happen due to carelessness and lack of control. They happen due to people not saying I don't know. They happen due to people saying I think I know and I'm going to BS something right now, and then blows up and you're screwed. So the difference between a failure and an F-up: encourage failure and discourage screwing up. I know that sounds really simple, but it's really important because a lot of people think that they're the same thing and they don't want to ever screw up, right? Failure is important, screwing up is terrible, and you need to embrace both. Failure should never require an apology. If you know your risks and things don't work out, you failed. Nobody needs to say they're sorry. You just need to figure out what you need to do to get back on track. Never make somebody apologize for failing if you knew it was a possibility. The corollary to that is screw-ups should never be dismissed with an excuse. If somebody screws up and gives you a really bad excuse for something, don't let it fly. Understand why they screwed up. Fix that mentality that put them into a position to put themselves in a screw-up. Don't let it happen again. I screw up so often, and I hate it. I still, to the life of me, have nightmares. Did anybody play Street Fighter Alpha 3 on the PSP?
Yeah.
All right, so I worked on that. That is the only game in the Street Fighter series that doesn't have Shadaloo spelled to canon spec. Because when I was looking at all the Street Fighter games, there were like 3 different spellings, and I didn't think well enough to go and check what canon spelling was. So the spelling's all over the place on Shadaloo in that game. It's entirely my fault because I screwed up, and I beat myself up to this day, and that was like 8 years ago. Because I got to work on a Street Fighter game and I screwed it up. So it sucks. I'm still upset about that. One of the last points I want to go over is what you say means something as a producer. So people are going to look to you for leadership. Unless you're Naughty Dog, which doesn't have any producers, and then they have a very organic system. But generally speaking, a producer is going to be either you're going to have staff members who think that you're going to be the dude who's just going to put the brakes on the creative director all the time, which is really antithetical to what you should be doing, which is enabling the creative director. But what you say means something, so you have to be really smart about how you communicate with people. The value of clarity and the risk of overreaching, right? You're dealing with a team of people from diverse backgrounds and abilities. They're not going to think the same way as you. One of the things that's been really beneficial for me working in Japan is that I know that I'm from a totally different way of thinking as everybody else in the studio. So when I deal with them, I have to think about, where they're coming from. And that's really important. If you don't understand where somebody's coming from, you're not going to be able to solve their problems. And if you can't solve their problems, you're not going to solve the game's problems. You need to try to be as clear as possible in both concept and communication. So if you've got an idea, make sure your idea is simple. Shinji Mikami once told me, and I think he's totally correct, if you can't give me a game design on a single piece of paper, you shouldn't be making that game. People do huge pitches. If you can't put it on a single piece of paper, it's probably not a really good game design. Finally, you can't solve everybody's problems, and your team will certainly not solve your problems. So don't try the impossible to do it poorly. If somebody's got a problem that's just, if you hate somebody on your team, you can try to fix it, but don't force something that's just going to make it worse. Understand that there are battles that you can win, battles that you will lose, and pick your battles. Finally, since you've sat through me blabbing on for 51 minutes about what I think about production, I want to talk a little bit about pitches. So one of the jobs that I have as creative producer at Platinum, especially being bilingual and having a lot of experience with the team, is that I'm involved with almost all of the pitches. And I've sat in rooms in front of some really scary dudes who impress the hell out of me, but also get to decide whether I get to make a really expensive game, and told them why I want to make a game. I think it's about passion. And I think it's all about passion, right? Seriously, passion should be the big thing that you focus on during a pitch. Because a pitch is a job interview, right? Essentially what you're asking for is money to do your job. If you go to a job interview and you say, hey, yeah, I really want to make games, you're going to be working on somebody else's project. But somebody on that project took that project to somebody and say, hey, I want to give jobs to 50 people to make this game. It's just a job interview on a different scale. So if somebody's listening to your pitch, they're already interested. Unsolicited game design goes straight to the garbage can. If you've got a meeting to pitch your product to somebody, they're already interested, right? So it isn't about making somebody want it, it's about making them want to buy into it, right? To want to love it. If you can express your passion about your project to somebody, to make them want to love it too, then they're going to be just as excited to make the game with you as they would be to buy it at the end, right? Because if you think about where they're sitting, they want to invest in something that's going to make them money. And the best investments are the investments that you care about. So your job in a pitch is to take all that passion and all of that love that you want to put towards your game design and make the person on the other side of that desk feel it too. You love it more than they ever will, though. So don't fold under question. When you're in a pitch, people are going to throw tons of crazy questions at you, right? How does this mechanic work? How does that mechanic work? Can you really make this? Are you insane? Those kind of questions do come up, especially the insane bit. Don't fold under questioning, right? If you've got a creative vision that you're totally passionate about and you love this game and you're in a pitch and somebody's like, how's that mechanic going to work? And your answer is to change the mechanic during a pitch, you don't love that mechanic and you don't love your game. Your job is to pitch that mechanic as something that's going to be awesome and explain to them why they need to love it too, not why you think you should change it because somebody just gave you a bit of feedback that has only heard about this game for 5 minutes. If you've been thinking about this game for 5 hours, 5 days, 5 years, you know it better. It's your job to make them love it. Finally, nobody knows how much a game's ever going to cost, right? Like you'll sign a contract for a game, or you will, talk about a budget for a game. Nobody's probably got a piece of string here, but if you can put like a string from here to there and tell me exactly how long it is, then I can tell you exactly how much it's going to cost. Nobody can do that for a game. So, if you aren't careful, you can sell your vision down the river on like budget stuff and how many man months it's going to take for something that you don't really know. And if you do know, you are the greatest pitch man ever because everybody's going to be happy with you. If you can pitch a game that's going to be on time, on budget, at the exact milestones that everybody's going to put into a contract because publishers love tons of little things about milestones and contracts, you're awesome. Never happens that way. So don't sell out your vision because somebody's machine gunning you with information about how many man months they think something's going to take. You might bite off something more than you can chew. That's when you go to the person who signed your game and you say, hey guys, we bit off more than we can chew. How do we fix this? That's a failure. Identify your risks, do that. The bad thing is when you're totally over budget and totally beyond scope and you were just insane when you pitch the game, and then that's a screw up on the publisher's part because they signed something that they didn't fully understand. So it's all about selling, right? All you have to do is sell. If I'm the recipient of your pitch, sell me, right? Sell me your game before it exists. That's all you have to do. Don't hype yourself up. Don't get all nervous. Don't be like, what questions are they going to ask me? None of that stuff matters. Sell your game. If you could sell it to a kid in an electronics boutique or GameStop or whatever. I worked at an EB, so I still call it EB. But if you could sell your game to a kid in GameStop, you can sell it to a publisher because that's the same exact thing that they're going to do. They're just going to spend millions and millions of dollars marketing it to do it, right? So if you can do that, you can get a publisher to buy your game. One last thing, we're always recruiting. And if you've got remarkable talents and you're interested in Japan and you want to learn about Japanese, if you're awesome, we can teach you Japanese. If you're not awesome and you don't speak Japanese, you're probably not going to get a job at Platinum. But we're always looking for people, so if anybody wants to take an adventure in Japan, feel free to send an email to that. And same thing for people on the live stream if you're watching. We love trying to have as diverse a workplace as possible. And every time that we hire somebody from a different background, I get really excited because I know that's just going to bring a new kind of element to the team that's going to make people think in different ways. And I think that's awesome. And that is my hour, and I'm ready for questions. Shoot.
Would you be able to just talk briefly about the team culture behind a lot of the different companies that you've worked for in the past 10 years or so?
Sure. The team culture is almost entirely thanks to Shinji Mikami, because when he created Production Studio for Capcom so Capcom goes through these cycles. Something you have to understand about Capcom is it's a family business. And if you're not in the family, you're probably not going to be long for the business. So at Capcom, the family kind of rises to the top, and that's how you have the Okamotos of the world being there for 5 years, and the Inafunes of the world. Inafune-san was really long career at Capcom when you think about it. Inside that structure, Mikami-san pushed very hard for director-controlled game design. Before that, it was primarily producer-driven. He got that with Resident Evil, and he created the biggest franchise that Capcom has. And because of that, he was able to continue to push out his ideas on how to manage a team like that. There's a really good Polygon interview that came out, I think, last week, talking a little bit about that. That's how you get people like Hideki Kamiya in his 20s directing Resident Evil 2 and getting the freedom to, almost ship that game and then totally scrap it and remake it. So it's a very creative director-driven atmosphere inside of Capcom because of Mikami-san. When you go to Platinum, Clover was very much like that because, we were in the same building. Basically, people just moved floors and got a different name on the check. So it was pretty much the same thing. Platinum's been really interesting in that there's very much an old guard of Capcom staff who are just total fanatics. Like, we're just insane. I think that the old guard people are gung-ho, let's just do this, and if somebody doesn't want to figure it out tomorrow, we're going to figure it out today, and they can live with what we're going to do. As we've hired new people, the company's been around like 9 years now. As we've hired new people, that culture's begun to shift. And it's shifting in interesting ways. I actually like a lot of the shifts, and I dislike some of it. Right now, I think a lot of people think about game design as another career. Games have gotten big enough, and there's enough money in games that people can pick making video games as a career, whereas people who joined the industry 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was all about passion. and they would have been making games in their underwear for fun if they would have been getting money for that. But now you've got a lot of people who want to be comic book artists but can't be comic book artists because the bottom fell out of comics. So they're going into game design, and they treat it as a job, and they're not necessarily as motivated as some of the older hardcore guys or some of the super motivated younger guys. And it becomes a trick of getting those people to kind of follow the leader, so to speak. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Cool. Sure.
You spoke on job turbulence very early on in your presentation, and like clockwork here in the US and other Western studios, you see layoffs or studio closures and that sort of thing. But when viewing like the games media, you hear occasionally about problems with studios in Japan, but you don't really get the same sort of stories of, oh, it's springtime, the financials are out, layoffs. Is that just something that doesn't happen as often there? Is it hidden away? It's not like a thing that people care to talk about, read about, or that sort of thing?
You don't for two reasons. One, it's really hard to lay somebody off legally in Japan. So there's something called the Seishain system, which is kind of like a full-on company employee. At the minute that you make that rank of employee, it's pretty much impossible to fire you without like some incredible cause. I think that we've fired like 2 or 3 people in the entire life of Platinum because of the Seishain system. But you can, I like to call it getting quit. You will got quit, right? Like you will be politely asked to no longer work. That's where you hear like the old kind of the guy getting the window desk job in Japanese companies. That's getting quit, just not having the sense to actually quit, right? Happens all the time. What you don't see is there are ghost developers in Japan. There are tons of small little houses. The most famous being Kosei, who does some of their own work, and they take a lot of outsourced gigs. But there are tons of little studios like that that are living and dying by the next project. So when people say there's no really like, where's independent development in Japan? Independent development in Japan is all over the 3DS. You just don't know it. And a lot of those companies go under real quick. And a lot of those companies spring up real quick. The bigger, more stable companies, you don't see a lot of that stuff happening, but you see a lot of, wow, why are they doing that game kind of thing? And that kind of happens because they're doing it for the money. And that's how they keep floating. Yeah, I don't really know about like Sega and Sony. Like, there's a lot of companies in Japan that do the restructuring thing constantly. I don't really know how it works out for them, and I've never really been a part of it, so I can't really comment. Sure.
So Platinum is kind of like really well known for like their brand new IP and like those like new creative directions they take. But you guys recently worked on Metal Gear Rising, and that was like kind of Konami's baby. So I was wondering, working on somebody else's product as a producer and as like a creative, how did you find that liberating, and how did you find that constraining?
It's just different. Original IP is incredibly difficult, right? Like, I mean, you're making something totally from scratch. You have no idea what it's going to be when you start. You have less idea what it's going to be until almost the very, very end. Working on Metal Gear was really cool for me because I love Metal Gear, and it's like, okay, we've got this universe, we've got a sandbox, how can you play in it, right? So, to me, it's kind of the difference between buying the blue bucket of Legos and buying a Lego set. They're both Legos and they're kind of fun in the same way, but one's, you know, building this world that's kind of already on the front of the box and you get to enjoy making that, and the other one is trying to figure out what you're going to make, and sometimes it's hideous and sometimes it's awesome. So they're just really different. I don't think as a company we have like some crazy dedication to only making original IP. We take on projects that we find energizing and fun, and if we think that we can bring something really cool to a project, we'll take it.
So you actually touched on my second question with the tail end of the first one. It's about indie culture. And I remember when I was coming up, I'm a couple years younger than you, but when we were thinking about indie games here in the West, ignoring the PC stuff, although I guess this is PC stuff, the stuff that we heard of the big indie breakout hits were things like Cave Story or Tomiki Fighters and that sort of thing that were coming out of Japan. And then you got all the things that happened on Xbox Live and then now Steam and that sort of thing. So Western development has really rallied around this indie mentality. And you talked about there's plenty of indie developers in Japan, but why don't we hear a lot about those projects? Is it because they don't have any of those big breakout hits anymore? Is it because they shut down so easily? I know there's Bit Summit, which is trying to, rally things, and
Yeah,
we got similar
James
things
does
here.
well with that. I think it's because they're Japanese, right? I mean, does anybody really know, like, does anybody know any German indie games? Like, unless that developer speaks really good English, it's a PR problem, right? It's not an issue of whether they're passionate about their games. They just don't have a really great way of getting things like that out there. That's why Bit Summit's really cool, is because it's giving those guys an opportunity to get in front of, Western media and get people to understand their games. The other thing is, they've already got a really vibrant market for indie games, especially on PC in Japan. They don't really need you guys. Right? Like, they can go to Comic-Con and get 300,000 people walking through their booth in a weekend. And think about it. I mean, if they sell 1 or 2 copies per 1,000 people that go in there, they're doing pretty well for themselves over a weekend, especially as indie developers. So I think it's just a different scene, and they've got a language barrier that they've got to overcome, and they've already got a really set market, so they don't need to kind of go crazy.
So from online, 2 separate questions. How do you feel about the Kickstarter movement, it says, and if more Japanese developers should adopt it? And number 2, how do you, can you talk a little bit more about hiring people outside of Japan, such as voice talent? What's the process for doing that if you do it?
Kickstarter is awesome. Kickstarter needs to get bigger in Japan. Kickstarter as a website needs to localize into Japan so that they can get people. Right now it's based on Amazon payments, right? So Amazon's huge in Japan, but they need to put their site into Japanese, right? And if they did that, a lot more Japanese developers are going to be comfortable with doing crowdfunding. Kickstarter is a weird beast. Like, I don't know if you guys really look at Kickstarter much, but Kickstarter is essentially nostalgia projects that are getting a lot of money, and then everything else doesn't get jack. So some really good friends of mine, created a studio called Scary Mostro, and they just did a Kickstarter that failed for an absolutely awesome original IP. These guys were the lead multiplayer designer and the lead gameplay programmer for Call of Duty, right? And they did all of that for Titanfall as well. The game plays amazing. They had the art staff that had left Sony Santa Monica after God of War 3 doing the art for the game. The art looked really good. It had some placeholder animations that were a little bit janky, but it was really awesome. They had set a goal of 400,000, they got like 39,000, right? Abject failure of a Kickstarter, and it sucks because people should be using Kickstarter to support original IP and original game ideas, and instead you just have people funding nostalgia projects. So if you want somebody to make, like, the lead game designer from Zone of the Enders has left and is doing a Zone of the Enders clone for Kickstarter, and then yes, let's throw millions of dollars at it, that's great, but is that really what we want from Kickstarter? Like, do you guys really want just to play a reskinned version of an old game that you haven't played in a while, and that's where we're going to spend, $4 million? Or Star Citizen's what, $40 million because nobody's played a space sim in 15 years? I think it's cool that projects like that are getting funded. I think it's a travesty that projects that are new aren't. So that's kind of my personal thoughts on Kickstarter. As for voice actors, get an agent. AAA games will not hire you unless you are a member of SAG-AFTRA. If you're not good enough to get an agent and to be a part of the union, then you're probably not going to survive as a voice actor. So you kind of get that question a lot, actually. Like, how can I be a voice actor in games? I've done temp voice for our games. I sound terrible because I am not a voice actor. So when I'm going to spend a whole bunch of money on voice acting for a game, I'm going to go to a casting director in Hollywood, I'm going to book a really nice studio, and I'm going to get all my actors from the union. There's a lot of non-union work that goes on, but the non-union work that's going on is just the union actors, but you can't put them in the credits, right? So those guys just want to work as often as they possibly can. But, if you're going to give me a choice between getting somebody like Steve Bloom or Yuri Lowenthal or Tara Strong, the people that we work with all the time, for the amount of money that I know that they get paid, knowing the quality that I'm going to get from them, it's really hard to break in unless you are in Hollywood, get an agent, start going on auditions, and you do the actor grind. And that's pretty much how you get into voice acting. So, hold on, go ahead. Sorry.
So did you work with Tara Strong?
Yeah. Yeah, Tara's awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah, Tara, we worked together on Wonderful 101. She's Pink, and we've auditioned her for tons of things. Otherwise, it's always fun. She's super nice in the booth, and Chris Zimmerman and Tara are really good friends. So it's always nice to see Tara.
Sweet.
Go ahead.
I guess a follow-up to the question from YouTube. I guess the same question except for like game programmers. I touched on this on Twitter before.
Okay.
Specifically for Platinum.
How to get a job?
Yeah, like I know you touched on it on the during your presentation, but I was wondering if you had like more specific advice for people essentially trying to follow your path, but the other way around, like with more of a concentration on the engineering side than the...
If you don't have shipped titles, learn Japanese, get to Japan, make something that shows how good you are, and shop yourself. If you have shipped something, ship something really awesome, and then have it come to my attention. Or have it, well, not my attention, I'm not the HR manager, but right, like have it come to somebody's attention that is going to be interested in hiring you. So ship it or put yourself in a position to get noticed. It's kind of the easiest way to explain it. But I mean, essentially what you're asking a Japanese company to do at that point is to take a risk on you, because you are a risk, right? You are somebody who's not from that country, who can bail out whenever they want, who's going to cost a crap load of money to hire because they got to hire an immigration lawyer to get all your visas and do all your paperwork. There's going to be money to cost to get you flown in. It's a really big ask for a Japanese company to just hire somebody without some really awesome reason to go to that effort, right? Because you are not the path of least resistance.
So with like Bayonetta, you start out with Sega because you don't publish your own titles. I work at EA, so it's kind of a different mentality where we publish our own stuff.
Yeah.
So like, how do you kind of like do the challenge of you're with Sega for the first title, and then the sequel's coming out, and then you end up on a different publisher? Kind of how do you like? What kind of challenges does that put for you? Because now you kind of have a fan base on set platforms, and now you've moved to another platform to kind of keep this series alive. How does that?
Without getting into some stuff that, you know, is both business and confidential,
Sure.
The simple question I'd like to ask you is, do you want to play Bayonetta 2?
Yeah.
Okay. Bayonetta 2 would not exist without Nintendo white knighting that project.
Sure.
So, while I totally understand that people want to play it on the platforms that they played it on previously, we really wanted to make Bayonetta 2.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean,
it's how, I guess how more now do you have to oversell, because you now have to bring an entire, you know, like, I don't know, it just seems like a big challenge to try to continue that.
But if you were going to sell a game on a Nintendo platform, what publisher would you choose?
Yeah.
Right,
Well,
Nintendo.
not many now.
Right, so if you're going to sell a game on a Nintendo platform, the publisher that you want to be with is Nintendo, because they know how best to service their audience, and they're going to do the best job of explaining your game to that platform. You very rarely see, you know, huge major third-party successes on Nintendo platforms, because it's really hard to fight against Mario, right? That's why Universal isn't as big as Disney. I mean, it's really hard to fight somebody on that kind of turf. So we really wanted to make Bayonetta 2, and Bayonetta 2 is a project that we were passionate about. And when we couldn't, when the business situation changed and we couldn't make it the way that we were originally planning on making it, we definitely wanted to make sure that that project survived. And the games world is, I've seen Bayonetta 2. I look at it every single day of my life when I'm in the office. It's really cool. And the world is going to be a better place because Bayonetta 2 is in it than not. And, you know, I spent a lot of time on Twitter seeing people, you know, get really angry. Why is it not on PS3 or 360, right? And now you get so kind of the way it went was, why do we have to buy a Wii U for one game? Why isn't it on PS3 or 360? And now that the Xbox One and the PS4 are out, it's why isn't it on PS4 or Xbox One? Well, so then it's not about buying a piece of hardware. It's just that you just didn't want it on the Wii U. And that's cool. I mean, maybe that system's not for you, or maybe that platform isn't what you want to play games on. But we really want to make Bayonetta 2, and we think it's going to be a fun game, and the people who do play it are going to really enjoy it. And I think that we made the right decision to make sure that that game survived. I mean, I'd rather be in a world with Bayonetta 2 than without it. Any other questions? I'm going to check Twitter real quick and see if there's anything. Do you guys have anything else? We've got another 15 minutes. I can talk.
I got one.
Sure.
In regards to the Nintendo thing, when I guess more kind of like on a design perspective, I'm a little bit curious. Like, did Nintendo kind of like give you guys like a lot of like guff about like using like their platform, like the tablet type device more for the gameplay, or did they just say go nuts, just make it as awesome as possible?
Let me restate that question into something more general, which is working with a first party, right? So working with a first party, you have to understand that they want a game to be successful, but they want their platform to be successful as well. And that platform has pillars, and they want you to do your best to exploit those pillars, right? A smart first party is not going to make you put in things that use hardware pillars that are not done well, right? Like if we, for instance, in 101, right, we use the touch screen, but we also let you do it with controls, right? We give you choice, where if you want to use that hardware platform pillar, you can. If you want to use something else, you can. It's not in their interest to put bad game design into a game just because they want to use their hardware, because they're going to get eaten alive, essentially, in reviews, right? Like, this is just some gimmicky thing. Why is this in the game? And it's not in their best interest. So no, Nintendo is not like that. Nintendo will not shove hardware platform stuff down your throat because it's not in their interest to. At least from my perspective. I obviously don't work for Nintendo, so.
No, I was just curious, like, you know, if like it affected the design at all, because it is kind of like you said, it is, you know, something a little bit different versus like a PS4 or Xbox One.
We've got touch controls. If you played Easy Automatic in Bayonetta 1, then the touch controls in Bayonetta 2 are really cool, and that's public, and people have played that at the shows where we've shown Bayonetta 2. So it's cool. I mean, people, one of our programmers was like, I want to see what it would be like to put touch controls into Bayonetta, and prototyped it over a weekend, and it was fun. So, hey, new Easy Automatic now uses this hardware pillar. Nintendo's happy, we're happy, because we got to make something fun, and it worked out. Anything else?
Yeah, pardon me, you mentioned that the environment artists also serve as, or like designers, the environment process all the way through. What about the animation and character modeling? Will they also be considered more generalist?
Somewhat. So, pipeline-wise, anybody here a rigger? Your job does not exist in Japan. So, that's not a bad thing. Very often the animators will make their own rigs. And part of the reason why, especially in so if you look at Western game design, you've got a lot of bipedal human characters who can share rigs. You look at ours and we've got like crazy four-legged horse dogs that are like doing all sorts of, you know, when you're making a quadrupedal, three-faced angel demon thing, that rig's not going to work for other characters, so you're making bespoke rigs for almost everything. At that point, it's smarter to have the animator do that rig than it is the modeler, because it's not going to be a shared rig. So the modelers focus very much on modeling the characters and getting the materials and shaders, working with the shader programmers up to snuff. And our animators do their rigs and animate the hell out of them. And one of the things that I think Platinum is known for, but you guys don't realize, is, you know, our games run at 60 and they feel really good and they look really nice. That's almost all animation. Our animators are studs, like nearly uniformly studs, like just nuts, to the point where we get AAA studios that come to us asking to borrow our animators all the time. And part of the reason I think is because they do these really outlandish creatures and they have to make their own rigs. And if you're making your own rig to animate, it's probably going to look really good in the end. My Twitter is popping up, so if you guys obviously have priorities, so go ahead.
Do you guys have like dedicated UI artists?
Yes.
Do you? Can I ask how many?
A couple are spinning off and trying other things. So at our peak, we had 7. I think we've got 4 now. And we have got a custom UI tool in-house that they make everything in. We don't use Scaleform. Here's the thing with Scaleform, it's really flat. And if you're like a graphic designer who works very flat, that's really cool. If you look at our UIs, we have a lot of 3D elements, so we had to wrap our own tool. But yes, we do.
So you mentioned that coming from like a different background than the people you work with, you bring a different perspective to the table. Do you have like any like war stories or just like examples of a situation where you thought of something that maybe no one else in the room was thinking of because you had that background?
Yeah, and I've got times where I've missed things. I'm kind of the guy. This goes into. I wrote an op-ed for 1UP probably a year and a half ago about. I concentrated on Japanese film when I was studying Japanese, and especially horror film and genre film. And I really think that there's a lot of parallels between games and genre film. I'm kind of the guy who tries to bring the Western perspective to things, and maybe not always. We don't always need to introduce a female character with a bust shot, which we do really often. And I think that's, hey, the animators really love that kind of pan up reveal, and it's really super genre filmy, and I think it's really cool, and it's totally male gaze, and I bring that up, and sometimes I win that battle, and sometimes I don't, and I'll mention when I think that something's like inappropriate. There was Mad World had a scene where somebody got you could take champagne bottles and do that, and then they would go right, and I thought it was really funny because it plays to my really dark sense of humor. The ESRB did not very early on, and told us that we couldn't do things like that. So even with that, I try really hard to not be the guy who speaks for 300 million Americans or the billions of people who live outside of Japan. I am not a representative for the rest of the world. I am a representative for my own case, but I have a background that's very different from everybody else's.
A couple from here. At the end of the day, were you guys satisfied with how Nintendo promoted the Wonderful 101? And has Platinum ever considered taking on other companies' IP again, like with Metal Gear?
We are IP and platform agnostic, right? If there's a cool project, we're probably going to take it. If somebody walked up to you and offered you, a project that you had been a fan of for ages, would you say no? Like, anybody here are there a lot of Metal Gear fans here? If somebody asked you if you could make a ride-in action game, would you say no? Of course you would say yes. You'd be like, yes, where do I sign up? Like, what do I have to do that? As far as Wonderful 101, I'm not going to speak for the company on whether we thought that it was marketed well or not, because I'm just a single person. That doesn't mean that the company has some kind of thing about it. But I will say this, one of my favorite moments of the past 6 years working in Platinum was standing in front of 900 people at PAX and talking about Wonderful 101 with Kamiya-san. And that all happened because Nintendo made it happen. So if they're creating opportunities for us to interact with our fans and tell people directly about our game, then they're okay in my book every day of the week. Anything else in here?
You spoke earlier about making proper connections. Can you speak a little bit more about it in the context of trade shows and perhaps GDC or things of that nature?
If you're at GDC, personally speaking, I've never tried to job hunt at GDC, so I can't speak from personal experience, but I will say this. they've got an area to hand out your resumes and talk about who you are, right? Do that there. If you're interacting with developers or people who you respect or think might be able to help you out some way in the future, outside of that environment, I think you should try to be their friend first. And that's in a respectful way, right? I mean, it's not like, hey, dude, let's go get a beer. You're not suddenly their best friend in the world. But, you know, there's a lot of things that are happening at GDC. People, especially independent developers, will do multiple dinners in a night, right? So you'll have, you know, an appetizer here, a main course there, dessert over there, drinks after there, because you have to meet with so many different people. So everybody's time crunched. Everybody's getting all of this information thrown at them. The best thing that you can do if you're in an environment that's not purely about, you know, job hunting is be cool, right? Like, don't be like, hey man, I've got my resume in my backpack at this bar. Do you want it? No, I'm not going to look at this. I don't have a bag with me to put this away. I'll give you my business card and you can send me an email later. And if we had fun talking over drinks, then I'll really remember you and I'll continue that conversation. And if you're just a dude who gave me a business card or asked me to send you an email because I didn't have a bag with me, we're probably not going to have a long conversation afterwards. And that's just kind of the way it works. You got one?
I had a stroke when I was a kid, and so my right hand's kind of screwed up, and that makes me not as good at video games as most people. So I kind of rely on easy mode a lot. So I was wondering, how difficult is it to put different difficulty modes in video games?
Make your normal. Make your normal first, and then work out, right? It's really easy to make something hard. It's also somewhat easy to make something super easy. It's hard to make your normal. Your issue is actually something that is kind of near and dear to my heart. And sometimes I can kind of push things in a good direction, and sometimes I can't. But very easy automatic in Bayonetta.
I really appreciate that.
Right? Because you can play it with one hand. Unfortunately, like for instance 101, if you're left-handed, that game's nearly impossible. And that's just because of the way the controller's set up and how that gameplay works. I think we can do a better job as an industry of being cognizant of the fact that we've got really complicated controllers that people don't know how to use, or in your case, just simply can't use. And so, you know, make fun of Waggle all you want. A whole bunch more people played Wii Sports than they did, you know, everything save Call of Duty. And there's definitely a market for really complex controller-driven games, but there's definitely a market for things that aren't so complex. And if you were a designer on Wii Sports and you looked at your sales and it's like 35 or 40 million because it was all packed in, and you thought 40 million people played your game, you can hate Waggle all you want. Those dudes are sitting around being like, yeah, that was a successful project, and I'm really happy that I worked on it, because they reached a ton of people. Anything else? Sure.
I was just a little curious. This is, I guess, a little bit more like a West versus Western culture type of thing. I worked at some game studios in the past where we have had like small little teams on the off time will develop like little prototypes for upcoming projects, what they'd be cool, or maybe like an IP that might be like something we feel might be strong for our company that we've already worked with that we can spin off and do. I won't divulge into it, I just say, you know, you probably heard this yourself. Now, with your company, does that exist at all? Like, do you guys like have maybe like a couple of guys one night say, you know, hey, let's try this little prototype and pitch it to the big boss later and see what he thinks? Does that kind of exist in that type of culture at all? Because I don't really hear about that very often. It's more kind of like what I'm getting at.
How many failed pitches do you hear about, period? Because you don't
From
know
the
them.
inside perspective, a lot. But from an outside perspective, very little.
right? I mean, how many failed pitches do you, right? Nintendo cancels more games than they ship, but you don't hear about almost any of them.
True.
Because that stays inside the family, right? I mean, if everybody knew what everybody was making every single day of the week, that would drive me nuts. And that kind of, while it's cool, and I know lots of press dudes, and they really want, you know, they want to know everything right now, and that's their job. That's really damaging the game development because it creates really bad perceptions. And if everybody knew every single pitch that got prototyped or like every fun thing that happened in a studio, it would be just a cluster.
I think maybe
For
the
a good
question's coming
example.
off the wrong way. I'm more asking, does it exist, like, more like along
Sure,
the lines of,
absolutely.
like, just so you guys do that? That's
Yeah.
more I was kind of wondering.
Yeah, absolutely. I think every studio does that, right?
Okay, because I wasn't sure, because I've heard like a couple of my friends who are Japanese developers, they tell me, no, we work on this IP, this is all we work on, then we have the next IP we're working on, and that's what we're doing for the next 4 years. So I wasn't sure if like small little things come up here and there, maybe like simpler projects, things like that. Just, I don't hear about it often, so I was just curious if it existed at all.
I don't know the situation that your friends are in, but I think that people with game design skill set, if they really want to make something that they're passionate about, will find a way to make it. And if they're in an environment that doesn't allow them to make that, then they probably need to think about the environment that they're in. Right? I mean, at that point, then it's just a job, right?
Yep.
So, but yeah, we do that all the time.
Okay.
Rapid prototype teams are fun, right? Give 4 dudes a month to make something and see what it looks like at the end of the month. It's super fun.
It's always good.
Sure.
Sorry to keep asking so many questions, but you mentioned consensus building as well in your speech, and there's more of an emphasis on that in the Japanese game development community. But at the same time, there's also that creative focus that you have at companies, where you have that strong creative vision coming from a singular source. And game development is often like, you don't want it to be a democracy, but you also don't want it to be like a tyranny, right? So how do you find that balance between the two?
You have somebody who makes the decisions. Right? I mean, the creative director exists for a reason. If he's not there to provide direction, like if somebody throws out an idea and it's counter to the vision that he has for the project, then it's absolutely his job to say, yeah, that doesn't fit. Right? I go to Kamiya-san probably 2 or 3 times a day with just terrible ideas that he looks at me like I'm nuts and he says no. And that happens all the time. And then sometimes I take him something like, Angels and Bayonetta should speak Enochian. And he's like, wow, that's awesome. And that gets in, right? It's his job to make that judgment. So it is a benevolent dictatorship.
So where does that consensus building aspect play into it that you were talking about?
Everybody has a consensus that he gets to make the decision. I mean, it's his job to do that. And if you don't buy into that system, then, how many creative directors are you going to have on a project? So I think we're at time. Cool. Thank you so much, guys. This was a lot of fun.